Amen. So our agenda for today is really just to do a stand-up, go over blockers. Let's give people just a couple more minutes to come in.
Awesome.
And I'm recording it just because David's not going to be able to join right on time. He's meeting with the court right now to figure out some of the last questions that we had and to be able to share with them our plan.
Quinn, have you moved? Are you downstairs now?
Today is a day when my 2-year-old is not home, so it's easier to be downstairs.
See.
While we wait, Matt, maybe I can ask you a question about those courts. I was a bit confused just about the naming of the courts. Pardon?
Yeah, so you had been suggesting a naming convention
or just maybe like not a convention, just maybe like an example, because I'm just a bit confused as to, you know, if I'm looking at the naming guide that you put out, the examples don't actually have the variable name that we should be typing in. You've given examples of the types of courts, you know, like the Dorchester Division of the Boston Municipal Court. But I'm a bit confused as to how to actually name. So I'm looking at one form here now, for example, where you've got Boston Municipal Court and then District Court, Probate Court. How do you want that to reflect in a variable name?
I know the form you're talking about, I think. So that might end up having to be hard-coded.
Okay.
Because I think they have like 7 fields. So it's like it's expecting you to select from a drop-down menu. From each score, right? Yeah. And we're not going to do that.
Basically like okay, so when we have a form like that, how should we proceed? Should we add variables in? Should we not?
I would say that probably go ahead and add in variables for each of those 7 courts. I think it's the 7 courts anyway. Yeah. And name them something like court, BMC, court, district, something like that. So it's clear for whoever.
So it groups the courts by court first, as opposed to having BMC first.
I think so. I like to work that way in the hierarchy of the variable names, so that the most important information is up front.
Because I'm doing a quality check on another form, the affidavit disclosing care of custody, and Henry labeled those like BMC first. I don't know, Henry's on the call as well, yeah. So I was just a bit confused as to whether whether we
here I am.
whether we you'd want it to go court underscore BMC, court underscore district court, court underscore juvenile court, as opposed to the other way around. I prefer that as well, because I just think in the example you also said, you know, like assets, that was the example that I always go back to in terms of hierarchy, just so that it groups it in terms of that.
But yeah, go ahead.
I think that's a good idea. And then we should add that actually as an explicit thing, because that might come up on more than one form.
Definitely. I think it's definitely coming up in a lot of forms that I'm seeing. And that's why I was getting confused, because the way that there's no certain structure to how the forms are set out. So there's like different versions of the same question essentially. So I think I'll put that in, maybe I can do that in the GitHub note, and just say that we do court first and then underscore followed by whatever court it is. I don't need to mention that that's going to get hard coded later, or.
Well, we'll just make that one of the questions that we have already handled inside the interview. So.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. Sorry for just.
Thank you, Maeve.
Sure.
In terms of a roadblock that I think we've started to solve, I spent a good portion of today this morning on the Wizard with Kate Barry, who's our family law expert.
Oh,
it's
great.
the fastest way to actually do things after the QA is if a subject matter expert has time to have them do the wizard. So Kate is the reason Kate isn't on this call is because I told her to prioritize doing that with the family law forms.
Okay.
Awesome.
And so Kate and I got on a Zoom. I showed her how to do it. It was also really helpful because for people who don't know DocAssemble, the difference between having never seen an interview, difference between a question, a sub-question, and a field label is not obvious for them. And so being able to explain that and what's easy to change and what's not. So pretty soon we should have a bunch of forms run through the wizard. And I wanted to announce that on this call because if anybody is interested in jumping on like the learning DocAssemble coding train, now is definitely the time.
I'm definitely keen for that.
Yeah. And
sorry, I thought I was still muted.
No,
Sorry.
I love the enthusiasm. We're all gonna get a little punchy. I think like at some point this is gonna have something stronger than water in it. I don't know. Like coffee. But hate to say it, but it's a recession-resistant job skill, learning software development. So that's helpful.
Yes. This is the most busy that I've been in terms of people asking for my help for private consulting work.
Right.
These last couple of weeks.
Quentin and I are both lawyers by trade, but I have worked for Quentin doing software development, and I can tell you that by the hour, I get paid a lot more working for Quentin than I do working for my main organization. And that's coming from basically zero coding experience 2 years ago and working on this stuff on like my off hours, right? So it seems daunting, especially in these times where you feel like there's a lot of pressure to get something that works out the door. But it's actually pretty fun, and it's not that hard. If you're really interested in learning the DocAssemble stuff, and we're gonna need everybody we can on that, I would say I'm gonna do some tutorials, but honestly, the best way to get started is to go to the DocAssemble documentation. Like that's how I learned it. And I think especially for people, a lot of people on here are like lawyers or law students who think that way. The documentation, unlike a lot of other software, is put out in such a way that like you can just kind of read it more than you can most software documentation. I don't know if you'd agree, Quentin. It's pretty friendly.
I found there's a mix of what people's impressions are. Depends where you're coming from, I think. But everything is answered there. I would say that for sure. Some things assume a little bit more experience as a coder, and
right.
You have the right context to fit it into.
And that's,
but I wanted to say also, I am going to be working on the housing TRO. That's one of the ones we identified as like we could actually finish it by tomorrow probably, since I have the housing and the DocAssemble experience. And my goal is to stream myself working on that. I don't know a better solution than just using Zoom, although I could do something else. But I will share that. I might use, someone suggested Twitch for another example. So maybe I should do it on, I don't want to install something else though.
That would be awesome.
You have 11 minutes left on your 34-minute time.
So I'm going to do that this afternoon, and I'll put it on the channel. And it will be recorded as well. So if you wanted to go back and look at, it won't be that exciting maybe to watch it live, but if you're doing it live, then you could chime in and ask a question, hey, why are you doing that? But I will just record myself working on that interview for the next couple hours.
Any like stretch goals we should be aware of, Quentin, if you can raise a certain amount of money on your Twitch channel? And so you can see varieties of skill levels too, because I'll probably be doing that at some point too. And you'll get to see somebody like muddle through it much more than Quentin is. So yeah, great.
Yeah, I just don't know if I'm expecting it to take like 4 hours or something maybe to get from the PDF to an interview we can run. So that's a long time to record on Zoom. But I'll look into how quickly I can set up Twitch and whether that's really a thing to do.
A couple other announcements, and then I want to make sure we have time for blockers. So most of you who are on here have been involved in the various DMs around some confusion, which I believe I caused with mislabeling some of the 209A forms. We've decided, Caroline and I are just going to get on a call after this and we're going to fix it. So we're going to get on a call, we're going to fix it, and then just go to Trello. It will be right. God help me. It will be right. And then as soon as we've done that, I think we just want to make sure that all the 209A forms are getting done before we move on to the guardianship forms. Because it will make sense to code all of that at once. So if hopefully sometime this afternoon, Caroline and I will get that done. We'll be able to send something out to the Slack that lets you know, like, hey, everything's cool. Start work on it again. Yeah. And then the last announcement before we hear from anyone else, and then is I think I can sense from all of you that as organizations start to get a little bit better at business as usual during the pandemic, that things are heating up at school and at work, which is great in a way. But my sense is that we may need more people to work on the initial phases of labeling and QA. And that ramp up will probably be a lot faster now that we have a better workflow and, more importantly, skilled volunteers that can do maybe some of the training in you folks. So if you have friends, associates, enemies who you want to inflict this on, please just give them my information. You can have them email me, call me, just invite them to the Slack channel. Anything else, Quentin, that I'm missing before we get to Roblox questions?
Not that I can think of, no.
Cool. All right. Roblox questions, comments, concerns.
When cards get to the expert review stage, are we, for the wizard part, are we now wanting the experts to go through and do it in the wizard?
I think honestly, Henry, people can give it a shot, right? In fact, you should. If you can't get through it, which is really understandable, like I tried to go through the 209A with Kate, and I was like, oh wow, this is hard. And then I would say, like, if you can't, let me know. I would say if it's done with QA, like, see what you can do.
Yeah.
And then only if you need to move it back to that review column, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Because then that'll be our signal that I need to call Kate or Quentin or someone else.
So it sounds like we might need some more experts to join up.
Yep. I think, fortunately, Quentin and I do know a lot of experts in these areas. But if you folks do too, you should loop them in, because I think the unfortunate thing with housing, especially right now, is that the moratorium on evictions and foreclosure still hasn't passed. Like, it's been radio silence from the legislature for a couple weeks now. And I'm taking something out of the oven, sorry. So I think everybody is understandably really stressed about that and working on that. So the housing stuff might be somewhat limited for now. Does anyone else have any other ideas on how to address that expert shortage?
I mean, the only other thing that I can think of is if we feel like we need to have someone run through the wizard and it's hard to schedule that kind of in real time with someone who knows the wizard and also has the expertise, we could add another list where someone creates a draft just writing out what they think. Well, there's a couple of things. We could just try sending, okay, take this PDF, group it, the questions you think should go together, just mark it up using the annotate features of a PDF. The other thing that we could do is have someone write out a flowchart. And that does not have to be a DocAssemble interview. It could just be a, somebody writing it out in a Word document, what they think the order of the question.
It's not published on Mass Legal Help because the housing people decided it wasn't anyway, this whole group that meets with Chief Justice Sullivan of the Housing Court put together a booklet that contains the TRO in it. And that may have the kinds of questions. In other words, you're looking for somebody with expertise, but they've put together this booklet. Maybe we could use the booklet as a guide. Somebody could use that booklet as a guide. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so I actually think I can do the housing TRO form. That's
Yeah, exactly.
If there
Yeah.
are other things like that.
Are there others? I mean, Quentin, you can probably do all the housing stuff, right? I mean, I know that's on top of what you're trying to do.
That's the problem, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Also,
I'm going to pick up that form because it's small, it's concrete. It'll let us test a lot of these processes from someone
Yeah.
who's stuck in it.
What other housing, just quickly, what other housing, maybe I shouldn't be asking this, what other housing forms do we have right now in our list?
to housing experts.
I think there's a motion to remove a default.
Oh,
Yeah,
like that, which actually I've already automated a version of that.
yeah.
I can get Joey. Alexa or Joey, both housing law experts. Like I can get that if we need it.
Okay.
But
Let's see. Tenant petition form, is that the one? Oh, no,
Yeah,
that's
petition
enforcing the
transaction
state sanitary code,
Okay.
right?
I also think having run through the wizard with Kate, Quentin, and Caroline,
Hmm.
there is no good middle ground here.
Yeah,
You really just have to do it, you think?
You either a law student or someone with limited legal knowledge is going to have enough context to do it. It just relies on sort of knowing the court system and some basic logic on how the legal system works, or it's a really inside baseball kind of thing. So I don't think it's worth trying to figure out these half measures. I think if I'm going to spend time on that, I'd rather spend it wrangling, calling in favors, wrangling people, tricking them into getting onto Zoom with me.
oh, definitely. If you can find somebody, that's great. I was just thinking if you
I think it's going to be easier to find people than it is to effectively do these kind of middle grounds that we're talking about. That's my gut, having done it with Kate. Henry, would you agree, having tried to go through the wizard,
That
that it's either you can do it or we need someone who actually knows?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
would agree.
Okay.
And something to remember too is we're trying to do our MVP as this is the same experience as filling out the PDF, but it's online. You get signatures, you get auto completion, some basic things that are true for just any of the forms we do. So we can't let perfect be the enemy of the good, even at this, especially at this draft stage, because we know we can tweak, we can move questions to different places in the interview.
So that's a great point. So
can I just ask about this MVP thing? Is that going to go live? Are we going to use those, or those are just a draft?
I think we need to figure out what is our minimum quality level for any of the interviews. And I think that if it is as good as the existing PDF, then it's ready to go live.
The thing about that is, I think most people who do 209As, most people do them with an advocate.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they go to court to file them, they have an advocate.
Yes.
So they're not, I don't think anybody is just taking the fillable PDF from the computer, filling it out and filing at court. And that's, I just am concerned about the 209A specifically.
So we have, Henry can speak to that because that's actually his clinic's project at.
Right, yeah.
Right. But just to say, the scope is pretty small to people in Dorchester because otherwise it risks becoming a hotline that would get overwhelmed. But just to chime in on what Caroline's saying, I think talking with the people at the Domestic Violence Institute, we have some concern about, a protection order isn't always the best method in terms of safety concerns, which is why advocates. So maybe some disclaimers about that in the interview. I don't know if there's any.
Sure. I mean, one of the things, Henry, I think we would do, one of the things we would do is if you're coming from Mass Legal Help, you come from a context. And certainly in the interview, we would say, only you know best, and we have a paragraph about that. So I would think that we could put that in. The court doesn't have that, but I think to really be responsible, I think we need to do more than just have a fillable. I think particularly for the 209A. I mean, we're talking about life and death. And I realize that losing your house is really bad, but somehow what a 209A is doing is it's a degree more scary.
Yeah, I
Very
agree
understandable.
completely, Caroline. And I think there's a lot of thought to be put into this, but the fact remains that a person could go to mass.gov and do a 209A without any of this guidance right now.
They could, but they don't. And if you, well, right. We don't have to, there's no evidence about it, but I mean, what I'm saying is if you file a 209A that you've gotten from the court, that you've downloaded as a PDF, when you go to court, there's usually a victim witness advocate or domestic violence advocate there. In this scenario with the online forms, there isn't anybody there.
So one thing is that the court has released a hotline, and I would love for our process to be integrated with that somehow.
Yeah.
So that they're using our forms when they're available, and then they're
Sure.
walking people through that process that way.
Yeah, I'd feel a lot better like that, but just putting it out like that,
I think that in any of these cases, so the things you identified as resources that we have, we're not having to write from scratch because they
Right.
already exist.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
there's no reason
exactly.
to not put those into our interview. It's just when
Okay.
there's no existing context that we should feel better about having something up than nothing. But if
Okay,
we can get to the something better, and it's
okay,
not an
that's all. So basically,
Yeah.
like the warning, and for example, if you're under 18, it's really important that you know that the judge, and you're filing on your own, the judge could call your parents to come in. And that people should know that before they file it. And that's, I mean, that's better than what the court form does, but the court, in a way, that I think we ought to try to do a little bit better where it means protecting people.
Okay. Yeah, I think that we should do the best that we can in all of the forms, but
Yeah.
I think there is a point where we should say, okay, this is good enough to be our first draft because it's better than someone
Yeah.
not being able to use this
Yeah,
form.
I'm fine with that,
I
as
think
long
the
as it
stakes
doesn't
are
put anybody in
relatively-
danger.
Yeah, I think that point should be relatively low for most of the forms. If there's some forms where you feel like we just really can't do it until it's in a more intermediate state, then
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
what we should follow.
Okay.
I think also, and Quentin, tell me if you disagree, this is something the court should have to reckon with too, right? They're asking us to do a service for them. So I think I don't think we should necessarily have to make that call, right? Like if you put together something that was a bullet point list that said, here are our concerns, you need to keep that in mind as you put these up. And I think David probably has to be brought in on this conversation, but I don't think it's
I guess I could share our goal. Our goal is to have kind of like a draft interview at the beginning of next week where someone will be able to go in and tweak it and arrange it and add context. And ideally, next week, Friday, we'd be able to release a version of the 209A form just because we know how urgent that one is. So that gives us some time to think through like what are our internal milestones and when we need to have content ready for the different sections. I feel that the housing TRO, that we'll have a draft of that ready tomorrow because I feel pretty confident about the scope of it. It's relatively small. We can add in more details, like it's just a TRO. People have different versions of the TRO for different needs that we'll want to add over time. But we want to have the basic one where you can just fill in whatever your issue is first. And that we can do by tomorrow, I think. And we'll keep refining those as we get feedback. I don't know what a date for us to like really publicly release this is, but we might already have by like early next week be able to say, hey, this is a tool you can use and release it to advocates at different agencies that might need it.
Well, I'm fine with that. I think that's
Okay.
fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the conversations that David is having today with the court are about branding, what association the court wants to have with the project, whether they want us to use their logo and their name. And we need to figure those out before we can say this is a public link we can share with people.
And I do want to say again, Caroline, I think you're right. Like in the end, I think you're right. These are hard questions, right? Yeah.
I think they're actually easy questions, but I've been struggling with them for 10 years. So
Okay, just try it. Reach
I
it
think
across,
we-
reaching
think
my
we all-
hand to you, but okay. Uh,
I think you have to also consider, how far down the chain you want to go, because someone gets a protection order and they need to leave the house. Where are they going to go now, especially with the crisis and not people doing social distancing? So I think with this project, you have to think about what's the scope of how far are we going and thinking about how people are using these forms.
yeah, I guess what I will say, what is helpful in these situations is if people are pointing out problems, we also need solutions. And we also need people to work on implementing those solutions, which is super helpful in all situations.
I don't want to hold this up, but the other side of this with, I think, David's conversation with the courts also is, I think the courts often feel, but maybe that's not, that they held up for a little while on the child support forms. Sometimes they don't want to produce something for one side of a case. So in other words, will they ask us to make sure that we have the defendants of course they don't have to respond for 10 days, so that gives us an extra 10 days, but the defendant's response to a 209A complaint. But I'm just realizing if it's an ex parte hearing, I've got a little bit of time, but we ought to think about the timing there, so that when they do ultimately release them, not to advocates, but to the public, that we also have that one ready to go.
Absolutely. So I think that's part of the branding conversation. So being a project that's associated with the court and requested by the court versus one that is the court is helpful there. But I also think ultimately we should probably have that response, and I'm assuming it's a lot smaller than the affirmative request for the order.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it, but yeah, I'm assuming it's a lot smaller.
I also know that, like, as somebody who's a legal services lawyer first, I've had these conversations with David, who's been super supportive of the idea of, like, for me, I work in debt collection. If somebody ever asked me to draw up an automated small claims complaint, like, I'm out of here. And I think, I think any of us, if there's work on this that, like, we feel like we can't do, I think that's gotta take precedence, right? Like, follow your conscience on that stuff too. Does that make sense, Caroline?
Yeah.
All right. While we were on the call, I figured out the Twitch thing, so I think I will do that. I think that will work better for the quality of the recording and being able to get faster. So I will share that when I confirm when I should start it, probably in the next hour. I'll start it, and I'll share that on the link.
And
on the Twitch, on the on the Slack, I mean.
All
right.
I think regarding your concerns on the 209A, because you are right there, this is people's safety we're thinking about. Is there something already written we could direct the court to so that they could help us make this call? Would you have the bandwidth to write something? Could you recommend someone else I could reach out to who might have bandwidth to write something?
So, what kind of? I'm not quite sure what you're asking for.
So you were bringing up concerns about, like, we need to do better. On this call, you've said we need to do better than the PDF on the court's website, and here's why.
Yeah.
I would like to reduce that to writing. Does that make sense?
Okay. Oh, I see. Yeah, I can write that up.
Yeah, because
I can write that up. Probably, I'm certain that Jeff Wolf and Jamie Sabino, who are real experts in domestic violence, would help me. I mean, I would run it by them.
I also
so
encourage you to, if, like, you have the disadvantage that you have with a lot of projects in that we, and I don't mean to include you in this, or Henry or other domestic violence people, but, like, we're meddling in things we don't understand. So if you think that it would be advantageous to get more family law experts involved on this so that your voice can be joined by other people who are cognizant of the concerns, just invite them. Let me know.
Yeah. So Henry, you have your people, right? You have your DV people at Domestic Violence Institute.
Yeah.
And I have 2 DV experts that I can just pick up the phone and call anytime. So in fact, this question about Superior Court, which I'm really reluctant to add as an option, I've spoken to 2 of them and another DV attorney. She's going to call a Superior Court because I think it's a mistake to include the Superior Court. So I have my resources and I just pull them rather than pulling them into I mean, none of those people are able to use Slack or even Google Drive. So,
Do you think they could use Zoom though, Caroline? They're doing something.
They can use GoToMeeting. I don't think Jeff might be able to do Zoom, but we spent half an hour telling him where to find things.
Okay.
So I'll bring him in if you want him to come to a particular discussion.
Yeah, I think what I just want to.
You just want it writing.
Well, no, I want it in writing, but also like because I know me and I've had conversations with like Quentin and David. You know, we're all in development mode, right?